Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Um, I want to welcome everyone to this Zoom Lunch and Learn session. My name is Paul Hosh, and I am the CEO of Nonprofit Fundraising Management, and or NFM for short. And our goal is to use modern fundraising to help Black ministries thrive. And basically, what we want to do is we're consultants and we help uh, the ministries find funding to keep them going and to thrive and for sustainability. And so reach out to us if you need any advice regarding the fundraising in your ministries. And next, I want to introduce our special guest, Romal Tune, a dear friend of mine, a brother actually, and you're in for a treat. Ramal is a remarkable storyteller. So let me just go ahead and read his bio. He's a full-time speaker and author. Ramal helps audiences identify and embrace their unique stories to thrive. His work has a clear purpose. I provide experience that inspire you to unlock clarity and momentum to thrive. With the platform and relationships spanning various sectors, Ramal is recognized as a global leader who equips individuals, nonprofit leaders, executives to recover from setbacks and achieve success. As a social entrepreneur, Ramal founded Clear Story Educational Fund, a nonprofit that promotes mental health awareness, helps people overcome limiting beliefs, and provides scholarships to college students. He serves as the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships with Marketing at TSM Global, overseeing cross-cultural leadership development programs in Accra, Ghana, Nairobi, Kenya. He is also the Chief Innovative Officer for Selah R&R Inc., leading a $50 million project to establish a Black-owned boutique hotel resort in South Fulton, Georgia, focused on rest, holistic health. Ramal's personal life is just as inspiring as his professional achievements. He is a proud father of Aman, who's a wonderful young woman, and an honor graduate from Hampton University and University College of London, and a member of the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, Inc. And his son, who's also amazing, is an honor graduate at Morehouse. So please welcome Romal Tune, friend, brother, and just an amazing guy. And before we get started, I always, as you guys know, I always like to do a little icebreaker. So I'm going to ask Ramal a few questions and then we'll jump right in.
All right.
Ramal, what is your favorite motivational quote?
My favorite motivational quote. I don't really have a favorite motivational quote.
Well, make one up there.
I think that one of my favorite quotes as a reminder that I share with people is um, do the work of healing your trauma before money shows up in your life. Because if you don't heal your trauma before money shows up, then your trauma will have resources.
Ooh, that's good. That's really good. I like that. Do you still get nervous when you ask for a donation?
No, not anymore. Yeah, I don't get nervous.
Okay, okay. Um, what one book would you recommend everyone read?
Oh, wow. The Alchemist.
Oh, I just read that. I just read it like a week ago. Reread it, I should say. Yeah, that's a trip. That's funny. What is the best advice you've ever received in one sentence?
And one short sentence, compliments are not currency.
That's good. Neither are criticisms, that's good. Um, what career would you be in if you weren't a speaker and author?
Actually, I was sharing this story Friday, Saturday, Sunday night at dinner. I was preparing to go to medical school to be a heart surgeon and turned down medical school and ended up going to study religion
Okay.
policy at Duke. Yeah.
I was going to say an art curator, to be honest with you.
I wasn't in art back then, and that would
Okay.
career I chose. But yeah, I was on the path to go to medical school.
All right. Okay. Malcolm or Martin?
Malcolm.
Okay. Okay. Rudy said Markham, meaning both.
I saw that.
You
Yeah.
saw that. Yeah. Yeah. I'm Malcolm too. I'm definitely Malcolm. Um, if you could have dinner with three historical figures, as well as current figures, who would they be?
Uh, Past and present.
Yes.
All of mine are past. Barbara Jordan, uh,
Okay.
James Baldwin,
Okay.
and Frederick Douglass.
Okay. I love it. Love those choices. I thought Malcolm was going to be in there, but I love those choices. And then, what advice would you give someone just starting their fundraising journey in one sentence?
Um, if you're first starting your fundraising journey, I would say um, stay focused, have clear intentions, clarify your intentions, and realize that it's not about you.
That's good. That's very good. Now, before we get into the questions that I prepared, uh, why don't you tell a story? Like, tell a story and show the participants how to tell a story for fundraising.
Sure. This is actually a true story of a ministry that I'm aware of. This is a new component of their ministry. So there was this gentleman who was a member of a church, and he lives in this neighborhood where there's a lot of development going on. And the context of the situation was it was winter, and he noticed from one of the buildings that was soon to be demolished, so it was abandoned, that there was some smoke coming from it. It looked like smoke. So he went over to the building and he saw that there were two kids in there by themselves and realized that there was this young girl who he later came to know her name, Sarah, and she was using a hot plate of sorts, something that she had configured to make her little brother some food. And he was around 8, Sarah's around 12 at the time. And they were homeless in there. They were apparently, as he found out, abandoned due to parents dealing with substance abuse. And they were afraid of him when he came in, and he saw that, and they ran through the building and hid from him. So he went back the next day, and he brought food and left it and went home. And he continued that for a while and began to cultivate a relationship with these kids who were living in this abandoned building. And he decided, after getting to know them, to invite them into his home. He then told the church about it, and the church made space for Sarah and her little brother who to have a home and start caring for them. That then led to the church looking for other kids in this situation who were homeless and in need of a place to stay, shelter, food, all of the basics. And at that point, the ministry was growing and they started adding on various services, housing, education, and other things like that. But their intent is to reach more kids who are homeless, like Sarah and her brother, and just come alongside them to help change their lives, to not only give them housing, but to love them well, provide education and real opportunity in life. And so we were asking people if this is something that they cared about, kids in these types of situations, and if they saw this as something they would like to come alongside and support.
I love that. I love that. So let's unpack that in terms of the components. So to the participants, Ramal just told a fundraising story and how you tell a story before you make an ask or before you ask questions to move to the next level. So Ramal, what are those checkpoints that you hit in this story?
Yeah, so you need characters. You heard me mention one child's name. You need context, their situation, what the environment they're in. They were living in an abandoned building, eating food and sharing it. So you have characters, context, and then you also have the gentleman who lived in the area. So you get the location, you get the people, and then you need an emotional component. and sharing how these kids were abandoned, they were homeless, and this guy would show up for them. So you have characters, context, striking an emotional chord, and then you need a solution. So you saw that he provided food for them, but then he provided his own housing for them, and then the church stepped up and did some things. And then you need a call to action. So you need characters, context, emotional component, a solution, and a call to action.
Love it. Love
You
it.
know?
And as you told that story, Ramal, especially as it transferred into the church, I felt emotion. It's as I'm listening to the story, I felt like, well, how can I help? That's a that's really how it's done. You sort of tell the story, and the listener sees themselves as being a part of the solution. And I think that was just brilliantly done.
Which is why I asked the question, does that sound, when we talk to people, does that sound like something you care about? Does this sound like some, a type of initiative that you actually care about, helping kids like this? I mean, it's hard to say, yeah, no, I don't want to help. Um, so yeah.
Well said. I love that. Well done, Ramal. So we're gonna get a little bit more to the program. Can you explain your overall goal in helping churches use storytelling to secure and increase their fundraising efforts?
Yeah, my overall reason for doing it. Uh,
Yes.
so for me, it's deeply personal. I come from a challenging environment. So a part of the work that I do in teaching churches how to tell compelling stories in order to raise money for the work that they're doing that changes lives is because through the work of these churches, they have the opportunity to help more kids who are growing up like I did. And I always remind them that I am only a monolith or a one-off when the church is not seeking to reach outside and change lives. But my journey from poverty and panhandling to being an honor graduate and running a business and doing fundraising only happens because of the impact that leaders and church members are having when they go outside and help people. So it's deeply personal that
Yeah. You're a product of,
I'm evidence.
yeah,
Evidence.
yeah. That's really what we ultimately want. And this is what I tell, potential donors is that we want the people that we're helping to someday become you. In other words, coming back and making sure that that program that helped them move forward, just like what you are the dream, Ramon. You're actually the dream of what a fundraiser really is looking for, the circle,
Yeah.
keeping the circle going.
Yeah, it's all about
So,
evidence that it works, right? And I
yeah,
think
exactly.
when we share our stories of transformation and change because of the work that churches are doing, it reminds people that what you're doing matters significantly in very practical ways.
And then when they see you presenting, it's just a physical, sort of proof of, it's anecdotal, but it's there, present, and it's powerful. One of the most powerful things you can do. I remember when I was at the school at Verbum Day, and we had this adopt a student program, and then I was there so long for 14 years. The students eventually adopted future students. And when I told donors that, they went bananas because it's the circle. If you're doing it truly right, it's going to become a circle. So that's well said. Well said. Next question I want to ask you is, why do you believe storytelling is such a powerful tool for churches when it comes to fundraising?
Yeah, I mean, the very nature of our faith is an example of a powerful story. The gospel is a story that we are drawn into. The Bible started through narrative before we ever had the written text, right? It was the stories of what was happening and still what is happening. So I think the church is the bearer of stories, and its identity is shaped by the most transformational story in history.
Yeah, no question. So I want to ask the audience to participate in a poll, and we're going to post it. has your church used storytelling to inspire giving? And if so, was it effective? So we'll take a moment to for you all to answer that. And so we'll keep going, and then we'll come up with the answer later. Um, what are, you just mentioned the essential elements of a story. Um, what
Mhm.
are the most common mistakes when people try to tell stories for fundraising? What are the common mistakes?
Yeah, I think one of the most blatant mistakes I see often is they tell the story about themselves, what they're doing. They start with, well, we're doing this and we're doing that. And that's why I always tell people it's not about you. Again, it's the story of the people and how you're working to change their lives. It's about them. So talking about themselves, centering themselves and the story of change. Another big one is stories that are about the activity of what they're doing, not the outcome. And so they're talking about all the activities of the work, but not the change that results from the work. Those are the two glaring ones.
One of the big ones that I see is, and I can be uh, guilty of this as well, is I'm a nerd. So a lot of times I start leaning into the numbers and the data a little more than the emotion. And and you really have to be careful about that because, for guys like me and even you, we're like, well, what does the number say? What does the number say? But when you're telling a story, that's not
Yeah.
necessarily the driver.
Yeah, no, not at all, not with story. But yeah, those are two big challenges. And then also, I think another aspect of when in working with churches when they're telling stories, a third is the ask isn't clear.
Say that one more time, Ramar. It looks like
It's a
you froze up.
there is no there's no clear ask. It's almost the story ends with the hope that this person will feel compelled to give rather than an actual clear ask.
That is such that we can end we can end the lunch and learn right now. That is such a huge point. And I feel like all my work with Black ministry, that happens more often than not. That there's no ask for a specific amount. There's no real ask, and you're just sort of hoping that they're going to step into the breach. And
And people are
so
not
as
obligated.
you go ahead.
I said, and people are not obligated to live into your hopes. If you don't communicate it, you cannot expect it, nor can you hold someone accountable to it. So your hope is yours, and no one's obligated to respond to your hopes. You have to communicate what you want.
Well said, well said. So let me ask you another question. How should a ministry start with their storytelling journey, getting ready to tell stories to move forward? Like I want to say one of the small churches, they've never really done that. How do they start storytelling? What resources should they go to sort of figure out what they're doing if they're doing it correctly, other than you?
How many things you have to do. One, the first thing that comes to mind is you have to talk to people. Um, who are the story bearers, their stories of transformation. You have to include their voices in the story. If you have access to people, invite them to tell their own story of change and how the work is changing their lives rather than telling on their behalf. It's more powerful when people can hear directly from the person whose life has been changed or is being changed. Another thing is another thing that churches can do when it comes to preparing to tell good stories is remember that this has to be a story of change. not a story of activity, of, hey, we held this event or we want to hold this event for this group of people. But what is the end result? What's going to happen after the activity? So the story of change and transformation, it has to be tangible. A big, another big one for churches, I would say, is this is not an inward faith story. This is an outward impact story. And so for a church, we have a tendency at times to tell stories that are inward faith journey story, but don't always tie it to an outward impact transformation. Like, so make sure that that story is a story where you can prove change, that is evidence based. As someone said to me years ago, when we were writing a proposal, we kept saying, we believe this and we believe that. And he said, I know what you believe, but what can you prove?
Yeah.
And stories that have some evidence. And then I think the last thing is remember that the story is a testimony. And so the Bible tells us that they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimonies, right? So the testimony has power. So do not see stories of transformation as something that's shameful. And some of my experience in working with churches, there are these amazing stories of change, but people hide them. And they hide them out of fear of being shamed and judged, when they are actually the most powerful thing, one of the most powerful things you can do to invite people into relationship when they hear that, oh, this actually matters because this individual was here and now they're in this new place. I want to be a part of that. So they can see that it works. So the last thing I'll say is just simply be mindful that these are not shame stories. These are stories of transformation and empowerment and evidence that God is still moving and that God didn't just move thousands of years ago, but look at what's happening to the lives of people now. And so redeem the power of the testimony from silence and shame.
Ramal, you are you're, you're on fire right now. You're hitting on so many fundraising points that are just that are connected to storytelling. That it's remarkable. The two that really jumped out that I want to highlight and underline is uh, have the beneficiary or the program officer talk about what they're doing or how they were transformed. Don't, if you're not the person that's directly involved, and you can access those other individuals, have them do it. I used to tell people when I was at USC doing fundraising, I used to say, I'm the highest paid tour guide on the planet because all I did was take donors around and introduce them to people and let them tell what it is they're doing. I didn't do anything. I just, or who was cured by the cancer, or how did this doctor do? I didn't have to do anything. So, if you can get the program officer, the person that's actually doing the work, to tell the story, there's nothing more powerful than the person that received the benefits of that work. That's actually the most powerful, but that's second. And me as a fundraiser, I'm just a hired gun. I don't they don't want to hear me talk. That's huge. And then the other point you made regarding focusing on sort of the outcomes, or the vision that you see, that's huge. A lot of nonprofits fall into the trap of shaming their actual beneficiaries by showing flies on their face, or the worst possible situation. That doesn't move people as much. It does move people, but not as much as you talking about this child is going to Hampton University. This child is going to go off and they want to become a doctor, and they want to hear that story. They don't want to see where they are now and you say, yeah, give us food and money because this is where they are. No, where are you taking them? Where are you trying to get them to go? And then not only that, the beneficiaries that are receiving, they're not embarrassed. they're not, they don't see themselves on the internet, 4 or 5 years later in bad situations. And so those 2 points they take fundraisers years to learn that you just sort of dropped out. That's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
You have to remember, you have to book in that story. If you show, when you show the challenge, you have to show the change. The challenge alone is you're trying to appeal to the lowest element of change. The challenge and the change together shows, look at the power we have together to take someone from here to here. Do you want to be a part of doing that for more people? And also not being ashamed of telling the whole story. It's not just the wounded place, but it's a work that takes that person to transformation and change. It's the end of the story has to be good news.
Yeah, that's well said. Alex, do we have any poll results?
Yes, we do. Just give me 1 minute to raise them here.
Not
So,
yet. 75%. We're just starting to work on that, and 25% said yes. And I think that might have been me that said yes. So
That would be probably
yeah,
the two
yeah.
of us.
So it looks like this is something that the attendees of this lunch and learn and can really benefit. And as a bonus for those that are here, Ramal has put together a checklist of what to look for when you're putting together a story. So we'll make sure to get that out to you. So that'll be very helpful. And now at this point, I also want the audience to start asking questions. And so I'll relay some of those questions to Ramal and he'll answer them on the spot. So I'm going to go to the next question that I have. How can pastors and church leaders incorporate personal stories in their fundraising efforts? Other
Yeah.
than that example you just showed at the very beginning of the pastor, which was a brilliant. Give us another one.
Yeah, I think there are several ways that pastors can incorporate story. One is, and it's the biggest challenge, because pastors, in some contexts, not all, are expected to only present themselves as this pretty much perfect person who life has always been well for. Uh, but when pastors are able to show their humanity in their own journey of transformation that's connected with a ministry the church is seeking to engage in, it humanizes that leader and allows people to see them as someone who is like them and they're more willing to follow. So I would say personal stories of transformation within the boundaries of, what's appropriate to share. And I would also say sharing again those stories of change that are happening in your context or the aspirational stories of change. It may not be something you're doing, but it's like, tell the story of the people, their context, their challenge, and what you're hoping to do and your desired outcome. And then the last thing I would say is the hardest thing I see churches do all the time is they talk about a problem that doesn't have a pulse. And what I mean by that is it's like, oh, we need to fix the elevator, or oh, we need to fix the roof, or we need to get the AC fixed. It's like those problems have no pulse. However, they impact people who do. So tell the story of the people who are being impacted by the absence of the elevator or the leaky roof or the absence of air conditioning or what have you. But don't talk about the project, talk about the people who are being impacted by the problem, and then why you're hoping to solve it, and what the solution will do for them, and then incorporate their stories into it as
So
well.
so let's drill down into that particular point you're making. So you're saying, if I'm understanding this correctly, if the AC is not working, they need to repair the AC. don't ask for money for the AC directly, talk about the after school program that is in the building for the AC, and where the kids are going off to college, and all those other things, how it's affecting the kids doing those things, and we need to fix this so that they're able to do those things. Is
that they're
that
not distracted, so that they can pay, they can focus, so that the teachers can, be present and not have this distraction that they're dealing with. Talk about the people, and then talk about, if it's not a program like that, but talk about the older adults who may have some health challenges that this is impacting, and what the situation it puts them in, and their why we need to solve it, right? Because if you're just talking about AC, I mean, people at home got their own AC problems, right? It's like, what makes yours different from mine? The human connection is what makes us both the same. And it's so therefore people are able to engage and relate to the person or the group of people and not just the problem. You have to
mm,
show how this problem is a disruption to the lives of people and what the solution will mean for them.
that's great. That's well said. So I also want to reiterate that if there are any questions, put them in the chat, and then I'll be able to sort of read those off to Ramal. So if the participants, the audience has any direct questions for Ramal, please put them in the chat. Ramal, I want to ask you a question that's not necessarily on the script, but it was because of the poll. Now it looks like most, if not all, of these the participants, these ministry leaders that's on this call, are not using stories to help them fundraise. Um, what is their next step? What should they do next? And it might take you a moment to think about it, but what should be the very next step for them so they can start doing that?
I think the first, in this context, again, I don't know the churches represented, but the first step um, in preparing to tell stories is looking at what are the primary problems we're seeking to solve, and who are the people impacted by them. You have to start there. What problems are we seeking to solve? Our clearest intentions. Who's impacted by these problems? Have we been talking to them? Because they should be included in the story, right? It's you don't want to try to talk about changing the lives of people you don't know. So engage them in conversation, invite them into surveys, sit down and have coffee or breakfast with people. Um, and as you are hearing their stories and putting yourself in the context of the challenge, you have a deeper understanding of the story. And now you're a part of it rather than from the inside looking out at the story. Enter the story, um, and get those elements. So those are some of the first steps I would say. Clear identification of the problem you're trying to solve, the people who are impacted by that problem, what you're seeking to do, and the outcome of impact it's going to have on those people when the problem no longer exists. Um, I think that's important for churches because oftentimes, Paul, in my experience, people talk about their activities and they see the activity as an outcome, but it's just an output. So it's like, we're going to have this dinner for people, or we're going to have this lunch for people, or we're going to hand out some food. And those are outputs, those are not outcomes. And one of the biggest challenges that I find in working with churches in order to land on story is to separate their outputs from their outcomes. I even have them make a column, write down all the outputs, the gatherings, the activities, all the events and activities, and then write down next to each one, what's the outcome, right? What is the actual thing that you
Yeah.
see, to be able to see different because of that activity? And how are you going to prove it? Are you going to separate people? Or, what are the next steps to prove that those outcomes actually happened? Because in many instances, people see attendance as an outcome, and it's just an output. What happened after they attended is the evidence that attending even mattered.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's well said. The one thing that pleases me about uh, Black ministry and the leaders is most of us. Not that I'm a Black minister, but most of us are natural storytellers. It's not like we have to go back to, figure out, how to put something. It's in our culture. It's in how we've been raised. And so there's only tweaks and a few things that we need to do to really push us over the edge to be excellent fundraising storytellers. Do you agree with that? And how would you expand on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that for a lot of us in the Black community, we are people of story. It's just in our DNA. We tell the stories all the time. And as I mentioned in the church, the gospel is a story. We are evidence of a very powerful story in and of ourselves. I think sometimes we forget to bring to the table that which we already have access to.
Yeah, yeah,
And those stories of impact. And so, yeah, I certainly agree that as pastors and even lay leaders in congregations, um, specifically in the Black context, stories is the essence of our journey. We share these stories. We bring people together and mobilize and stand up for different things because of a story. And those stories have tangible impact.
yeah. That's so well said. And over, my fundraising career, I've been doing this for about 27 years. And I've raised a lot of money, somewhere around 50 to 60 million. And, but in small nonprofits, which, it makes it challenging. But in all those requests and solicitations,
Mhm.
it was all centered around a story. It's, I mean, there's no way I could have, you know, got people to purchase a dream of something that hasn't even happened yet. Not to mention, Ramal, I'm not giving them anything that they can take home. They're not buying a car, driving the car home. And these people are writing big checks for something that's not of themselves. How else are we able to do that if it's not for stories? It has to be something that they can see, envision, see themselves as being a part of the solution, and then writing a check.
Yeah. And in that process, I would say also for pastors with story, um, the the stories that we tell in the church of modern day change and transformation are the modern day evidence that God is still moving, right? And here's the proof. Attach the historic narrative to evidence that it's actually happening right now.
Oh, that's good.
That way, people are able to connect the spiritual transformation to social change. So it then gives people the spiritual and the practical. Like because of who we are, here's what we're capable of, right? Because of what God has done in you and in us as a community, here's what we're able to do together, right? And connect the biblical narrative of who God has always been. We always say God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Mhm.
People are like, okay, prove it. So where is the evidence of change? And we have it. It's just that we have to tell those stories to people outside, and to some people, some of the donors inside. A lot of we sit in congregations where members are hearing amazing stories in small context of change, but those stories are not shared so that everyone can see, look at who we are together, look at what we're accomplishing. And so that you can put those stories in front of your major donors, your whole congregation, and see change. I think that churches sometimes tend to ask people to give to support activity. Hey, we're going to have this night out for the kids, or hey, we're going to have this music event, or we're going to the movies together. We're going to host a luncheon or a breakfast. Give to support these activities. And you're probably raising the minimal amount of money you could possibly raise because people are not funding fun. They're not funding luncheons and breakfasts. They're not funding outings because there's no transformational component to that. And unless you can say, we are engaging in this activity because a part of our vision as a church is to combat and overcome isolation and loneliness. Because the data shows that after the pandemic,
Yeah,
we have a
yeah.
new pandemic of isolation and loneliness. So this activity is tied to our desire and vision to combat isolation and loneliness and give people a place of belonging that they can be a part of. And then share the stories of people saying, yeah, these activities and people inviting me out
Yeah,
pulled
made
me
that
out of my
happen.
isolation and my sadness. And now I feel like I'm a part of something. Now that activity has real practical meaning. So um, do not resist the urge to focus on the activity of participation as your fundraising why, but focus on here's the change we are seeking to bring about as a community together.
That's so well said. I almost, this is so funny. I almost lost a donor by not doing what you said. And this was probably 15 years ago. And 14 years, 15 years ago, I went to a donor. He and his wife were large donors. And I asked him to sponsor our gala. And I
Mm.
said, our gala, we're going to be doing this. We're going to have this many people here. Because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't become seasoned until later. I'm a late bloomer, as you know, Ramal. And he looked at me and he said to me, Paul, we're simply not interested in that. That's not something that we'll do. And it's going to make us question our continued support of your organization. Talk about being in the crosshairs. I had to scramble and I had to quickly learn and figure out exactly what you just said. And then the next year I went back to them. Guess what? I went back to hit with them on based on our math department and what they're producing and how our kids are trying to get into MIT and all this other stuff. But I never brought up an activity to this man again until I left. He was a major donor. You
Yeah,
really got to be careful of that.
and don't get me wrong, the dinner and the activity isn't a problem. The problem is when you don't connect it to a much bigger why.
Exactly.
We're hosting this dinner or this whatever the activity might be to solve for this problem.
Right.
And so what we're hoping to do after the dinner, right? The dinner isn't the end game. It's
Right.
the change that will
Yeah.
happen after the dinner, right?
Yeah.
So no serious donor is going to put their money towards everybody having a great meal. Like
Right.
that's not going to happen. And so for churches who have been using that model, and I would imagine that some have been using that approach, thinking that it is the way to do it, support this activity. But they do know why they're engaging in the activity. They just never added that part. And then
Exactly.
when you add that part, you have to be able to prove that it happened. Like if you say
Right.
desired outcome,
Yeah.
then you have to be ready to answer the question, well, how are you going to know that that happened? Then you say, we're going to do X, Y, and Z after the
Yeah.
event to as evidence that it actually happened. We're going to do surveys. We're going to, see us. do an analysis of what change is happening in people's
Right.
lives, observe their activity, but in some very metric-driven ways. People will say, well, the Bible isn't about metrics. This is about faith. And I would say, well, there's a whole book of Numbers that all is literally called the book of Numbers. It's all about metrics. And you look in the New Testament and God added to their number daily. Somebody was counting to know the number was being added to
Yeah,
daily. Um, the Jesus said, "Go make disciples." Right? That's change. How do you
yeah,
know disciples are being made? By seeing people acting like disciples.
yeah,
So it is change is can be evidence based. Um, People don't resist change who are change makers, right? We out here, we want to make a difference in the world. What we resist is being changed and now having to be held accountable for proof that our activity matters. And that makes people uncomfortable at times. So when you're telling stories and inviting people to say, hey, tell us, you go to your various ministries and say, hey, tell us the impact stories of what has been happening because of the ministry you've been doing through your activities. They're going to feel uncomfortable at first because they haven't been gathering those stories. And the discomfort is also attached to what if there are none? What if we've only been celebrating activity and turnout, participation, and we never gave thought to the proof that showing up mattered? And let them know it's okay. That's something we're now going to incorporate. We need those stories so that we can invite people into supporting the work that you're doing, so that we
yeah,
can show them that it really is changing lives.
yeah, yeah. That's really good. Um, because this reminds me, going back to what you said a moment ago when you said the event or the gala is not the end game, and it's not anything wrong with sort of fundraising for a gala, but it needs to be connected to something bigger than the event, as you've been saying from before. And the one thing that I learned, Ramal, from that interaction with that donor that we almost lost was, instead of saying, your $50,000 is going to get you, a table and a sponsored ad and all this other stuff. We had that in there. Don't get me wrong, because a lot of it is corporate driven. But we also said, that's gonna send 10 kids to college, or that's gonna pay for, these books for this class, and that's gonna, and so, they saw that, they're gonna get their table, but they're also seeing that, the money is going to something bigger than the event. So I think that's just such a great point you made.
Yeah, let me say this. We have about 9 minutes, and I think this is important. I said it before, but it cannot be emphasized enough. Make Do the work of making your church environment a place that welcomes stories of transformation and change. In other words, make your space a place where the testimony is welcomed. Not just the testimony of I got a new job or I bought a new house or my kid's going to college, but the stories where people confronted their ghost and conquered them. They overcame addiction, they overcame alcoholism because of a ministry. Their marriage is no longer in shambles, but they are thriving and they are loving each other well. Their children have come back home and who were once gone and they didn't have relationship with. The counseling services have now made them more stable and able to look for work. Stories that started out with hard, difficult things that most people faced, yet sit in silence with and hold alone, and have been changed and their lives made better, but they silence the testimony because they don't want people to see who they used to be. And so they're afraid of saying, this is where I was, and this is where God and the work of this church has helped me get to now. Because confront that shame, redeem the testimony from silence, so that people can know it can happen for them too. I think
Yeah.
is a very big thing for churches, that make your congregation, your community, a place where the testimony is welcomed and celebrated, where people are excited to share their story of transformation.
Yes. 100.
um, and that the congregation is so proud of them and able to express gratitude for what God is doing, spiritually and practically through the lives of the people, that people will want to go out and help other people
Yes.
change their lives. And they want to be a part of the story. And the person with the story can't wait to tell
Oh
you
man.
the amazing thing that God has done in their life,
Oh
and
man.
know that they will be celebrated for
Yeah.
overcoming, not shamed for their past. So to cultivate that space, it's the leader has to guide that process. And how do you do that? The leader has to look at his or her own story and find their own pain point that God changed through connection with other people, right? So it's spiritual and practical. God did it and God used people, and share their own story of change and transformation with the congregation. Because as the leader, you are now giving everyone else permission to do the same. So people have to see that you are willing to do the very thing that you're asking them to do. And I think that you will find, as you discern and seek God around what story to tell, as your story of transformation and change, your testimony, and how God used the church, you will be surprised at the people who now have permission to say, "Hey, Pastor, I have a story I want to share too."
Yeah. Yeah. That's so well said, Ramal. And from an old fundraiser, we're not necessarily, the pastor or the leaders of the church. And so we had a sort of a different angle, and ours was we were repositories for stories. Like, so we were intentional going out. So we didn't get people permission. We were going out and asking for stories. And so we had the teachers, we had the counselors, we had parents, everybody sending us stories about how the school was affecting their communities, children, families, whatever. And so we were very intentional on getting those stories. So I cannot agree with you more. That's such a great point.
Are there any
Um,
questions in the chat, Paul?
we didn't get any questions that I could see. Let me open up I don't see any questions. Um, so one more time, if there's any direct questions you'd like to ask Ramon, we just have a few moments, and we would love to answer any questions. The one I do, oh, here we go. We do have a question. Let me open this up so I can see it. I thank you for this webinar. How do we contact you for specific information? So they're not talking about me, Ramal. Ramal, let me just say, Ramal is extremely busy. And so, Ramal, how do you want us to handle this? People
Yeah,
trying to reach out to you.
I do workshops, I do coaching. You can visit my website, which is romaltune.com. Um, and that's probably the best way to submit a request. You'll see there the various types of workshops and coaching provided. Yeah, and of course, if you have specific requests, that's the way. If you're interested in learning more about story, my Instagram and LinkedIn, but especially Instagram is where I share a lot of stories, and that's my name, Romal Tune _ at the end. So if you type in Romal Tune on any social media, that's my handle on all my social media.
That's great. Thank you, Ramal. The the one question if we can go over just a little bit, I want to ask this question because I think unless we get another one, um, no, we haven't gotten another question. So let me ask you this one because I think this one's important. So I want to ask this. Once a church has successfully used storytelling to secure donations, how can they continue to engage donors through stories over time?
Oh yeah, this is critical.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to ask it.
So when you invite a donor into relationship and into a story of change, you must keep that donor engaged along the way. Like once you get the gift, the story is not over. The story
It's
is now
just starting.
started,
Yeah.
right? The story has begun. And now you have to provide them with updates on stories of transformation. Keep them engaged. Hey, not with activity, but with stories of change, right? Don't say, hey, we hosted this and look at that, look at this activity. Continue to keep that donor aware of the change that's happening in the lives of people because it's telling the donor, look at what we're doing together. Because of your support, look at what's happening in the lives of these people. So you're constantly sharing stories with that donor because that donor is now a part of the story of change. The money isn't, the donor is, right? The money is a tool that the donor is using to be a part of the story of change. And so you have to keep them engaged and communicate with them and continue to share stories of change. You may find that the donor came into some additional resources, and because you stayed in touch, they're going to give another gift.
That's
Or
it.
the donor may be having a bad day, and you sent a story that showed them how they're a part of changing someone's life, and now they feel better about their day. Donors are people. They have a lot of the same challenges that we face. Money does not remove people from the human experience. And so and that's the reason why many of them give, because
Well
you
said.
know, they are giving to solve a problem in communities that they actually have happening in their own family environments. Um, so keep them engaged and keep sharing stories. Sometimes I would just check in on donors and just ask them how they're doing. As a church, I literally reach out, hey, how can I be praying for you?
Ooh,
Every
that's
now and then.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a person of faith, right? So I don't just care about this person giving money, I care about this person.
Yes,
And so I
indeed.
do want to know, how can I be praying for you? Because if work you and we've worked with enough donors to know that they go through some really hard stuff. Their relationships, their children, their own issues. How can I be praying for you? Share the stories, but also let them know that you care about them too.
Yeah, that's great. That's great, Ruth. That's such a great comment that she made. Um, so I want to wrap it up. We are over our hour, and I want to thank Ramal one more time. This is priceless, and we're doing these for free, and I just appreciate you, Ramal, that you've given this knowledge that you've amassed over the decades of storytelling and the books you've written, and you just sort of know how to do this better than anyone that I know, and for you to come do this, with NFM and with SBC 21 who made this happen. I truly appreciate you, brother. This is just fantastic. And Ramal, you had a book. You have a book that came out. Talk about the book a little bit.
Yeah, I have three books. Again, if you go to the website, you'll see all three, but they're also on Amazon. The most recent one is I Wish My Dad. It's a stories of healing. It's all of my work, all of my books, everything I do is about stories of change and transformation, and inviting people into the opportunity to share their stories of change. But one that I think is helpful to this group is also Love is an Inside Job. Very, very practical book as well. And then many people, I think some here know God's Graffiti. But the most recent one is I Wish My Dad. I think that Love is an Inside Job is a very compelling book where you see my own journey of change because of the practical way that churches show up.
Well said, Ramal. Do you have any upcoming events?
Yeah, I'm actually going to be in DC with Emory Fellowship Methodist Church in downtown DC. So I'll be there Saturday doing a session on healing trauma and thriving. And then Sunday we'll be doing a conversation, Pastor Joe and I, around that same topic, healing stories and thriving. Both the practical aspect of therapy, but also the spiritual aspect of healing trauma as well. I want to thank everyone for you, Paul, for hosting this, and all of the leaders who are part of making this happen. I've had the opportunity to speak with folks on behalf of SBC 21 before, so I really appreciate y'all.
Thank you, Ramal. And one last thing, we have another Lunch and Learn coming up December 11th, and that's Aquanetta Betts, and she's doing a talk on planned giving. And everyone needs to be on this call because a lot of times we have individuals in our churches, in our ministries, I should say, and they pass away and they leave their house to the state. So we need to learn how to tell stories to get planned gifts. So make sure you don't miss that. She's been doing this for over 20 years. She's a sister, and you need to be catching that up. And lastly, if you need some fundraising advice, make sure you reach out to us and book a 15-minute conversation on some advice. We'll give that to you for free. It'll be a lot longer usually, and we'll do whatever we can to get you going towards your fundraising journey because we have to get beyond passing the plate. We can't just do that anymore.
Not the fund ministry. Yeah, it doesn't work anymore.
No,
Uh,
it doesn't.
but I would say on that planned giving, Paul, I really will look to sit in on that one. One of the things I noticed with the challenge some fundraisers have with pursuing planned gifts like that is their own internal trauma around knowing they're not ready.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
like
You
you
and I
have,
talked about this.
yeah. And so it's in some aspects of fundraising and telling stories, it's harder to tell stories about change when you haven't confronted your own ghost around that
Yes,
same story.
yeah.
Um,
And
it's a
and
lot of
trying to
work.
figure out how to open that conversation. So how
Yeah.
would you open that conversation, Ramal? We talked about this.
Um, the conversation with a planned
We're
gift.
planned giving.
Oh man, I don't know. I don't
So
get
so
to do that.
remember, so what you want to do, you want to put it onto them. So the question that I tend to ask is, what do you want your legacy to be?
It's a
That's
story. Yeah, that's it.
that's the first question you ask, and then you go
Part of
from there.
a part of my
Or how do you want to be
storytelling work,
remembered?
a part of my storytelling work is around the story of you and people realizing that every interaction you have, you're leaving behind a story of you, right? Every day you
Yeah,
interact with people. When you walk away, you have left behind a story of who you are. And so, yeah, this journey of how do I not only want to be remembered when my story is over, but how do I want to be remembered as my story is still being lived out?
yes, yes. Ruth, did you want to ask a question? Your camera's on and your mute is off.
Oh, not really. I'm just learning a lot, enjoying a lot, and in a way reconnecting with Romel. He had come to Philadelphia, and I brought Five Youth. It was your book about graffiti, and it ended up starting a I guess you call like a book talk and learning for a Sunday school, and it went for about maybe 2 months every
Oh
Sunday.
wow.
Quite successful in us taking the book chapter by chapter, pulling out the salient points, and resulting, I think, in a good learning curve for those middle school students.
Great. Thank you for that.
But
Well, it looks
I
like
don't want to hog the conversation, but sacred places, I mean, we were gifted, with a grant, and we are actually embodying what you're saying there, where they're saying we're giving you money to help you with all the leaks in your 102-year-old church. However, we want you to do a deeper dive into the community. Who are you? Who, let them know you. And as a result, this Sunday, as we celebrate our anniversary, we're going to be honoring 11 of our members who really were high achievers in the United States. And to do that, we have a Hall of Fame. We're going to have an induction ceremony. And of course, you're looping back to our sacred places, inviting them, thanking us. And we also, with the money they gave us, started a Hope Center on Saturdays. Our money's going to allow us to have it for about 10 weeks. But I think listening to everything you're saying, we've got a story to tell about the success of this Saturday morning program that we think can be a fulcrum, I think, anyhow.
Yes. That's great, Ruth, and the benefits from the funds. Well,
Yes.
I don't want I know Ramal's got a ton of stuff to do. I thank you, Ruth, for coming on and speaking. Ramal, you be well. I love you, brother, and I'll see you in a couple weeks. Thank you, everyone. This has been fantastic, and check us out the next month. Be well.
Yeah,
Bye bye,
thank you.
everyone.
All right.
Thank you again.